Hades. 2021's Game of the Year, though it came out in late 2020, is a Greek mythology rogue-lite, where Zagreus, the player character, tries to escape the underworld, his birthplace. Now, typically, the roguelike and roguelite genres don't have particularly strong narratives. They focus and rely on their gameplay over everything else. Think Binding of Isaac, One Step from Eden, or Risk of Rain. Hades breaks that mold. Ignoring its fantastic main story for now, something this game does with its side characters is incredible. Of course, I'm morally obligated to comment on the incredible writing, voice acting, and art that goes into every interaction you have with these people, but there's something much greater at play here. Many of these side characters have embedded narrative, story and lore that comes through the environment, from certain objects or certain people, as opposed to enacted stories, where that narrative comes from events the player sees or takes part in throughout the course of the game. I mean, just to list a few, Megara has a history of Zagreus, Thanatos has a history of Zagreus, Achilles is separated from his lover, and Orpheus, the court musician, refuses to sing. These are all details and smaller narratives you slowly learn over the course of run after run as you talk more and more of these people, but Hades takes it a step further. These embedded narratives, once you learn enough about them, start to become enacted ones. Take Achilles, for example. You know his sorrows, you know he's separated, but then you meet his beloved Patroclus up in Elysium and become the messenger between the two, eventually finding Achilles' pact with Hades, which prevents him from visiting his lover, and changing it so that they can reunite once more. The main plot, however, moves almost the opposite direction. We first play through the enacted story of Zagreus trying to escape the underworld, later learning that he's trying to reach his mother, but there's this one line from Artemis that really sticks out.
Something's troubled me a little about you. You fight so desperately. At first I thought you simply lacked in patience, but now I see it's urgency that drives you. What is it that you're after, really?
Zagreus himself has an embedded narrative, half buried beneath that enacted story. What he's after, really, is an identity. There's a masterclass use of ludonarrative harmony that works to convey this, but first, I should define that term. Ludology and narrativity are two huge factors when it comes to analyzing games. Ludology focuses on how the mechanics of a game communicate ideas and feelings to the player, while narrativity focuses more on the literal story and the diegetic world of the game. Ludonarrative dissonance is when these two conflict with each other, like if you had some intense, high-stakes cutscene promising a fight to the death, only to transition into some Candy Crush matching puzzle for the battle. Ludonarrative harmony, on the other hand, is when the message sent by the gameplay and the narrative reinforce each other, and there's a lot of that in Hades, too much to recount here, and what I want to focus on is specifically the harmony surrounding Zagreus' sense of self. Every speaker in this game always has a title. For Hades, that's God of the Dead. For Hypnos, that's Sleep Incarnate. But at first for Zagreus, he has nothing, only to give us Prince of the Underworld once he refers to Hades as his father. But later, we learn that the Fates prophesied that Hades would have no heir, so that's hardly even a real title. But either way, he lacks anything unique to himself, and doesn't seem to belong anywhere either. With both the procedural rhetoric of the game's diagonal perspective on everything, contrasted on PC with the straight directions of the WASD controls, and the fact that Hades' gameplay loop is literally Zagreus running and fighting for the surface, only to inevitably die there even when he succeeds. Zagreus grows stronger between runs through the Mirror of Night, which draws his power from the goddess Nyx, through keepsakes gifted by other characters, and through upgrading his semi-sentient weapons, the Infernal Arms, and he gains power during runs through Olympian boons and Hammers of Daedalus, the Master Crafter, and none of that is related to any ability of his own whatsoever. Even the aspects of Zagreus present on his weapons don't offer anything unique. They only give him extra stats like bonus damage or dodge chance, while other aspects give the weapons unique abilities or mechanics, like Zeus's Blitz Disc and Talos' Magnetic Cutter. His fighting skills were also narratively taught to him by Achilles, and any skill he gains throughout the story is, from a ludological perspective, the player's. The only thing that's really his is his cast ability, the Blood Crystal, and note that, we'll come back to it soon. But that connection of the player through skill and gameplay pushes us even further. Players start off the game with basically no knowledge of his motivations, only implications given through his flavored dialogue, and as such, the player projects their reasoning and desires onto him to simply fight through and escape the underworld, no matter how many tries it takes. And even after learning more, the desires of Zagreus and the player continue to match through empathy, because they're one and the same. Both want to find out more about Persephone and the story surrounding her and Hades and Zagreus himself. We as players take away from Zagreus because he's what we control, but over time Zagreus breaks free from that bond, going from projection to empathy to sympathy as he gains that identity he's really after, pulling away from the player and more into himself. Part of that is carrying those side character narratives into fruition, accomplishing something under his own name both narratively and ludologically. Diegetically it's his dialogue, his relations, and his efforts, and it's his dialogue, not the player's. It's an important though slight sense of control that Zagreus wrests from the player as these embedded turned enacted narratives develop at his hand. This table about different types of player-avatar relationships well reflects this process. On the first run, before we meet any of the other characters, players focus mostly on the action because that's all there is. There's a sense of detachment there, but Zagreus is not a complete blank slate. He demonstrates some personality through that flavor dialogue of "Goodbye, Father," and "To hell with this place." However, lacking information, we project our own motivations and ideas onto him. And as he interacts more with everyone, we start aligning with him instead, as the relationship moves towards empathy as a result of his independence from us regarding the side characters, and it hits sympathy later, when he truly gains his own identity, and all we want is to see him succeed. But what is that identity? In the game, the blood of the river Styx, found in pools of purging, is what can cleanse you of Olympian boons, giving you coin and recompense. If you get to the final boss fight against Hades with no boons, he has special dialogue commenting on how Zagreus lacks the stink of Olympus, references how he probably just washed it off in a pool of purging, and before attacking says, "Show me what you yourself can do." Ludologically and narratively, it's blood that makes Zagreus more like himself. And if you combine that with the blood crystal and how Alecto the Fury refers to Zagreus as red blood, for how he bleeds like a mortal, there seems to be a foundation for him being the god of blood. That idea then extends and combines with the greater plot, this hidden embedded narrative finally joining the enacted story, with his determination to save his family, to reunite Hades and Persephone, and to heal the bond between his family in Olympus and his family in the underworld. It all comes together in this vital line. This blasted family, it cannot just keep hiding from its problems, running from them. We're stuck with one another. We have to do everything we can for one another. It's in the family. It's in the blood. That ever-flowing, ever-present life and determination, blood, sweat, and tears, and all of that is within his domain, his newfound identity as the god of blood. No matter how many times he died throughout the gameplay and the story, he always came back and tried again and again, doing everything he could to reach and talk to his mother, to repair his broken family, his kin, his blood. That's what everything came down to, his slow transition from having no identity, from being detached from the player in a screen for projection, creating lasting change by turning those embedded side character narratives into enacted ones, even as he failed repeatedly at actualizing his own story and desires. That embedded personal narrative of identity coming together with the main story, everything coalescing with Zagreus now independent of the player because this is his family, not ours. And that's how it all resolves. The way that Hades leverages that ludonarrative harmony through its mechanics, the aspect of Zagreus, washing off boons, the diagonal world, the gameplay loop, the way it weaves together both those embedded and enacted stories, that subplot of self-discovery feeding into and driving home the overarching narrative, and the way it utilizes that player-avatar relationship between us and Zagreus to further emphasize his character arc and change. All of this is a model for how to make a good game. Not a good movie, or a good book, but a good game. Let's think about the other roguelites I mentioned at the start of the video. We'll use One Step from Eden as an example, a deck-building action game, and try to analyze it in the lens of what Hades has done for its genre and for the medium. The game has a whole cast of characters, but we never really learn anything about them. It has 254 spells and 176 artifacts, many of which having subtext in gray, but all that ever is a reference to something else or a joke. Never does the game really try to create an embedded narrative of any kind, not with its characters, not with its environment, and not with its items. There's also never really any ludonarrative harmony, partly because there isn't really a huge narrative, you're mostly just fighting to reach Eden, but also because the core roguelike mechanic of starting over and over again, of playing through run after run, is never addressed in the game other than for unlocks. There's a time travel mechanic, yes, but only for a specific ending. From a narrative standpoint, every run resets you to 0. There's so much missed potential, even just for implementing one thing from Hades' collection of tools. It can contain an embedded narrative in the spell subtext that emerges through dialogue of other characters, just as an example. That's what Hades shows us. It emphasizes the strength of the medium. Developers in most games have a whole world to work with, a whole cast of characters with their own personal struggles and stories, a whole swath of mechanics to grant meaning to, and an entire dimension between the player and the player character to exploit. Hades is a masterpiece of storytelling, and the way it puts everything together, that strategic and complete use of all the tools and resources the game provides, is something all games should strive to emulate, whatever the goal. A game must do everything it can for itself.